Today we're going to learn about variables. I'm going to teach you how to create and use variables in your Python programs. Variables are something that applies to every programming language, so this is very useful for you to know. You can think of a variable as a storage location for the data that you want to use in your program. Just like everything in Python, variables are case sensitive. So a capital A is different than a lowercase a. Identifiers, which are the names of variables, can contain letters, digits, and underscores, but cannot start with a number. In addition to not being able to start the names of your variables with numbers, you cannot name your variables words that are already reserved for Python. Every language has words that already have a meaning, and this applies to programming languages as well. So, there are certain keywords that you are not allowed to use for the names of your variables because they're already taken by the language. If you don't know the reserved words, you should refer to the documentation. I provided you with the link to the list of reserved words that you cannot use to name your variables. You cannot create an identifier that is one of these names. You're probably asking yourself at this point, how do I create a variable? Well, creating a variable is a simple three-step process. You create variables by using what's called the assignment statement. It has three parts. You start with a valid identifier, a name that you're going to refer to your variable with, followed by the assignment operator, the equal sign, and then, lastly, you provide an initial value for that variable. Let's create a variable. Let's create a variable with the identifier wrapper. Using our assignment operator, let's give it the value of Tupac, which is a string, and then press enter. Creating a variable is that simple. Now let me see if I can break the rules. Let me try to create an identifier starting with a number, one wrapper, followed by the assignment operator and an initial string value of Biggie Smalls. Will this work? No, it will not. You are not allowed to do that. Likewise, you cannot use one of the reserved words as an identifier. For example, let's say I try to name a variable class and assign it the value of, let's say, our class, Introduction to Programming. Would this work? This too is a syntactical error because you are not allowed to do that. We discussed earlier that every value in Python has a data type. Well, the same thing is true for variables. Every variable has a data type, but there are times when you will want to convert from one data type to another. This process of converting from one data type to another is called casting. I like to think of casting as when the witch turns the handsome prince into the frog prince. He's still a prince, but he is now the frog version of his previously handsome prince self. Python has functions that you can use to convert from one data type to another. There are 4 that we are going to review. The first function we're going to review is the STR function. The STR function allows you to cast another data type to a string. This is useful when you print out values, especially when you are trying to join or concatenate different types of data together. This is best shown through a demonstration. Let's take the value 300, for example. What is the type of the value 300? It's an integer. Now, if I wanted to cast that integer to a string, all I would do is pass the value to the STR function. If I did that, its type would be converted to a string. But why would I want to do this at all? Let's start off by showing you what happens when you print 300 to the screen. Everything's great. But what if I want to print the value is 300? I would have to join a string with an int. And this I can't do because the 300 must be a string so that I can join them together. What I would do is I would print out the value is plus, and then I would cast my int to a string, and everything works just fine. You can cast data types to integers as well using the int function. The int function will convert one data type to its whole number equivalent. Remember, integers are whole numbers, including 0 and negative. The int function is really handy when converting from strings to numbers to perform calculations. So I have a program here, and I'm going to ask the user what their weight is. I'm using this special function called input. The user is going to be prompted, what is your weight? And then they're going to type in a value. So I typed in my weight, 175. And this will be assigned to the weight variable. What is the current data type of the weight variable? If I use my type function, it tells me it's a string. That's a problem if I want to perform an arithmetic operation on the weight, like adding 10 to it. You cannot combine the string and the integer together. I need numbers to do math, so what I'm going to do is cast the weight to an integer and then add 10, which would give me 185 pounds. The other two casting functions I want to talk to you about work the same way. To cast to a float, use the float function. Remember, floating point numbers have a decimal portion, so if I cast the integer 300 to a float, it would simply add a 0 in the tens place. We spoke previously about the importance of booleans. If you need to cast a value, like a 1 or a 0, to a boolean data type, you can use the bool function. Remember, booleans are the data types that represent on-off, yes-no, true-false, and 1-0 data. So if you were to cast a 1 to a boolean, it would result in true, capital T. If you were to cast a 0 to a boolean, it would result in a false, capital F. You probably saw me use the print function in the earlier demonstrations. The print function does exactly what it sounds like. It will print out or echo to the screen whatever value you pass it. Provide the value and it will print it to the screen. It's important to note that older versions of Python didn't have the print function, they had the print statement. So watch out for that. Giving users the ability to provide data to your programs is extremely important. This concept is called user input. It involves any technique that you use to get feedback or data from the user. You probably saw earlier on I used the input function to do this. The input function allows you to ask the user to provide information, and then once they've done so, you assign it to a variable. From there, you can use the value of the variable as need be.